Hello everyone, this is Sarah from Crafting and Relaxing, and there I just showed you an atlas that I was excited to use, but then my friend brought me this giant Encyclopedia Britannica atlas with yellowed pages, and I replanned a project that I'd been working on to accommodate the color scheme and this map because it has more detail and more of the small towns of the specific area of Idaho that I wanted to use. And here I'm showing you how I planned which circle punch to use because I only have one shot at punching this and I want to be sure that it captures the visual area that I want to see. I decided on the larger punch, and here I am stressing about it a little bit because I get the one chance and I don't want the white to show, and I'm trying to get the names of a bunch of specific small towns. And there I go, there's my punch. And I was very happy with how it turned out. And then I'm using a cracker box and the same punch, and the punch I bought used, and it has a little bit of a glitch, doesn't always punch perfectly. I had to edge it out with scissors. And what I'm doing there is I'm backing that piece of map so that I can pop it up and it'll be sturdy and protected as I work with it. And I was trying to figure out my card and how I was going to emphasize it. And again, I'm going to my Hermadotto because on an item like this where I just get one chance, I want to be sure that I use the right glue. I could have easily used my art glitter glue too, but it might have been the one time that I set it down in the wrong place. So with this, if I needed to, I could pick it up again. Then I'm just laying it down, getting it nice and sturdy. Then I was thinking about offsetting it with a circle to highlight it later. I thought I might use the light blue to draw out the lake. You'll see that I forgot that later. That was kind of a bummer. And here is a stamp set that sadly will probably not be available by the time you look for it. It's a Runaway Art Studio exclusive. As you can tell, this video is sped up and heavily edited because this card took me forever. I spent a bunch of time choosing the right green out of all my markers and my pads because I'm trying to recreate an area that doesn't have, that has trees that are kind of a certain color. And then I realized if I used a green ink pad, all of the ground effects down below would be green. That would imply that my forest floor was going to be green because I would have these little green trails, not on this single stamp, but on the other stamp with a bunch of trees. The area that I'm recreating in my mind, it doesn't have grass. It's a cedar grove and it's only brown on the bottom. Here I'm coming back in with a darker marker, one of my zigs, because I wanted to mix it up a little bit. I used one of my green Color In hand lettering pens. If you're a hand letterer and you're very dedicated to it, you would not use those pens to color stamps. I'm on the fence about hand lettering sometimes, and green isn't necessarily the thing that I'm gonna pick up and write a message with. I was more concerned with having the perfect trees than preserving my hand lettering pen. Typically these zig markers, like the one I'm using right now, are better for coloring stamps. They have a big nib on the end, not a brush that could get damaged by coloring repeated trees. I edited many of the repeat items like the 3 trees and that kind of thing because you would have watched me color trees a lot. But you get the idea. You take your marker, you color your trees, and then you stamp it. Here I forgot to do the brown across the ground, but I'll fix that later. And I masked over that tree. I cut the mask in advance and experimented with it, and then I masked over it. But watch this. I get a terrible image. It's not because of the mask, it's because of the masking tape technique I did behind that. I got that from a watercolorist online. Oh, one of the great art journalers. I'm sorry, I can't remember who right now. And I loved the idea because it tapes your paper down. But what it also did was from a stamping perspective, it made ridges underneath. So what I probably should have done was taped the paper down like I normally would have, for stamping the trees and then done the watercolor technique for the next phase. Well, live and learn, and it worked out okay. I patched it in, but in 2 different areas I had problems with the actual stamp because of it. Makes sense, I made a ridge underneath with masking tape. But it did hold it down really nice and it never slipped. It was neat to work on. I didn't want to have a ridge around the edge. You'll see the scenery that I put together. So here I remembered to color the brown. Oh, didn't. There we go. Now I'm going to remember to color the brown stripe. And this is what I'm talking about and why I chose to use markers instead of ink pads. I wanted that to be brown and I wanted my trunks to be brown. The environment that I'm trying to recreate doesn't have any underbrush at all. Don't worry when you look at your stamp. See, again, I have a stamping problem and I'm trying to figure it out, but I'll work through it later. When you are using a mask, it looks horrible until you take the mask off, so don't worry about that. Now I just decided, okay, I'll hit it with a green pen, I'll hit it with some water later, it'll be fine. I've come this far. And then I'm going to finish filling in I just patched it up. I'm going to finish filling in my trees. And what I've done is I've taped with the Hermafix just a tiny bit, that circle that doesn't match the card. It's just a space marker so I don't stamp on my map. I'm filling in my scenery and you'll see how that unfolds. And this is not a real advanced technique. I mean, there's some masking and a little bit of planning going into this, but anybody can do this. This is a great idea if you don't have very many stamps, because by repeating images and repetition, you can make a lot of different scenery with them with just a few stamps if you get creative and use masks. Here I'm just adding different colors to the trees because I want them to look interesting when it all goes together. And you'll see how this is going to come together. This card is for my sister. I have been planning it. I can't even tell you. It's embarrassing. I thought I would make it for her birthday card last month, and I'm terrible at birthdays. I never made it. But it was an important card, and I wanted to make it for her. My grandma sold her house in northern Idaho, and we grew up walking through this grove of trees down to the lake. And the thing that my sister and I thought we would miss most was the smell of the cedar trees. And so it's sort of a farewell to that location, but also recognizing that we can find a nice cedar grove anywhere and we don't have to drive as far. And it really was the best thing for our grandma, so we went with it. That's what this card is about. It's a very specific card. A lot of sentiment goes into it, and my sister is super hard to make cards for because she's an artist, and I'm not talking like me. She is like a paint anything anywhere kind of fine arts trained artist. It's kind of hard for me to make stuff for her, and because of the sentiment and because of her skills, so I really think about things for a long time, ridiculously long. I saw that stamp set. I already had tree stamps, but there's a sentiment on there that I just thought, okay, it's time. I have to get this card made. So I bought the stamp set and came home. And I liked these trees actually better than the tree set that I had to work with because they were just about the right size for what I wanted to do. I had ones that were too big and I wasn't sure how I was going to make this work. So these trees are just perfect for doing actual scenery, not just a couple of trees on a card. So there I'm lifting up my semi-mask that I made. Remember, I hate fussy cutting, so in that one I was just trying to add some layers. Now you can start to see how it begins to look like a forest. Just coloring and stamping a little. That's not a full mask, so I can't stamp to the left and expect it to work. But what I'm trying to do is with these two masks, I'm trying to get some different dimension in and layer things up a little bit. And you can just see that I'm going back and forth. If you're not familiar with masking, I have a video on it in my basic card series. Go back and watch those basic one layer cards. Look for the one with the cat and the row of flowers. That's the best way to learn about masking. Now here you can see I'm taking the brown off and the lower part of the trees because I want to layer over it and I don't want a brown stripe through my existing trees. And I'm just trying to get a light layer of trees behind them. It's about the house on Coeur d'Alene Lake, and that's why I chose the specific map and why I have all the trees and why I'm so specific, because in my mind I know how I want this to look. And cards like this take forever, and that's okay. They're lots of fun, but they do take forever. This time, fortunately, I was careful to be sure that I didn't put the video online before I mailed the card. Sometimes I forget and the video goes up before the person gets their card. This idea, not the using markers to color trees and taking forever, but the idea of punching an area out of a map would be really neat for somebody who was celebrating a wedding anniversary in a special place or celebrating a birthday. You know, maybe they were born somewhere far away. Just anything sentimental. You can find an old map or an atlas. That giant, beautiful atlas was $1 at a garage sale. Okay, so thrift stores, sometimes they're in like the free pile at a garage sale. Here you can see I'm taking that little tree and just going along the front because I don't want every tree on the card to be the same. I don't want them all in a row. Out of here, I'm just taking off the Hermodado and experimenting with how I think I'll put the circle together. And at this point, I started to see something that I hadn't thought of before, which was a path through the trees. Where I'm stamping and I have that piece of paper up in the left, I am testing that ink on the same exact paper that I'm using because I want to see what these are going to look like. So I have two different brownish reds. I probably would have liked something a little more brown, but interestingly, I didn't really have one. Put your mask away safely, okay? Because I spent a lot of time cutting that mask, not the other one that's kind of trashy, but the one that actually I fussy cut that entire tree. You want to keep your masks. Otherwise, they get stuck to something and you lose them because they have Post-it tape or Hermafix or something temporary on the back. I'm not a watercolorist by any means, but I wanted to have the brown that would be under these trees. So I'm going back in and I'm filling it in, and I have a rag. One of those inks, I think it might have been the zig in the trees, bled really bad. One didn't and the other one did. So when I get anywhere near those trees, they go crazy. And here, based on how I stamped it, I started to see the path, and I thought, okay, I'm going to put a path. The path should have been in my plan all along. I just didn't really see it until I saw the gap and I thought about growing up and running through the trees, and we would run through the trees on the path. So that's what I'm doing, and there were actually multiple paths, especially when I was younger, that came together. So I'm filling in under the trees with the brown. Got a little thick there. Remember, I'm learning the whole watercolor concept. Then I go back and clean it up a little, try and add some water, work that out. And essentially what I decided to do was I went in heavier and with the slightly darker one on the path, filled the others. And I really, really like how this part turned out. Some parts of this card I'm happier with than others. I was trying to use my new crop, what's that big green cutter called? I don't know, you can watch the cutter video, but I was making a 5x7 card and the measurements on that get a little sketchy between 6.5 and 7. So I really had a hard time cutting the pieces to layer this card up. You'll see later in the video that I literally take it apart and put it back together. I used that black ribbon in the end, which I'm not thrilled with, and had I really thought about it, I would have done the offset circle that I showed earlier in the video or something else. So there were a few things that I didn't love. What I did love was the paths. I really liked how those turned out, and I was happy with the trees. just the emotion that it was for me, and that I hope for her too, because it was a nice reminder and just a farewell to it. Here I'm just experimenting. I'm also looking at the coloring in that thing compared to the colors I've used on the card. I didn't add any, I could have added some gray rocks, but I didn't add any underbrush or anything because this area really had none. Later in my life it had a house in it, but in my mind I just edited that out. I just tried a marker. Oh, that was too teal. Nope, that's too dark. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm testing them right on the same paper to get an idea of it. And then I go for the trusty old Salty Ocean Distress Oxide. I think that is like my new favorite ever. Because it's so bright, I was really trying to be careful and see how I'm testing it on there. It's important to test it. I didn't use distress oxides. I thought about using distress inks or distress oxides for my trees, but the color wasn't quite right, and so I just stayed away from them. But I was really happy with how the sky turned out. I probably should have gone in with a little more color. I think I was a little bit too fearful. Sometimes on video it shows better. You see different things, and I've seen people or heard people on their videos say, if you're struggling with something, take a picture of your card. And I think that's what happened to me, is I finished the video and looked at it, and that's when I knew I was going to take it apart. So I guess that happens to all of us, and I don't want you to think that just because you see a finished card or someone gives it to you or you see it on Instagram that you think it always comes together perfectly. It doesn't necessarily. We work at it. This video is, 30 minutes long, and I edited a lot out of this. Keep that in mind. You can see I just barely put in some blue, then I went in a little darker, and then I didn't like how I got those weird little dots. Remember, I have virtually no watercolor experience. This is about 30% of my experience you're seeing right here. I think I've done a couple other cards, mostly just the idea with markers or ink. I don't even actually own watercolors. So I'm just polishing up and taking out the big dots. I'm gonna let that dry. It was really important to me that I let it dry all the way so that I could make sure it would be flat when I went to assemble it, because remember, I only have one map. While the camera was off, you'll see it switch over in a minute, and it comes back dry. I thought of some other things that I wanted to do, or some little touch-ups. Here we are, it's dry. I've had a lot of time to clean my brushes and look at this and think about it. That section on the right was bothering me because I wanted the path to disappear into the trees. So now the forest got denser right there. See how I did that? Here, I didn't like that white spot in the middle. I really didn't intend to leave that, and it got worse when I put the circle in. I just didn't like how it was. So I colored the stamp, and then I stamped it off, and then I'm gonna come in and cover that part up, and then do a second generation stamping. And that means it will be lighter. It will look like it's back behind there, not as much emphasis. See that? The edges where you get that tiny white line, that's because I didn't cut my mask perfect, but that's just fine. So now it's dry. You can see I took my Zig marker with a tiny, tiny end on it and put little dots all over the paths. The paths were always like rocky and covered in pine cones, and I wanted to make them darker. I also added little touch-ups in green to the trees and just kind of fiddled with them. And here I'm trying to get the ribbon right, and I'm going to use my Memento ink to go around the edge of that to make it black. I could use a marker, I could use an ink pad. It doesn't matter what I use. I just wanted to be careful that I didn't mess it up. And sometimes when I use a marker, I slip and write on the front of it, and that you have to be super careful. See, right now I'm using a Sharpie, a little bit out of camera, but I just wanted to be sure I wasn't missing spots. To tie the layers together, I'm going to do the same thing on this one because I had so much work in it, and sometimes when you drag a big piece of paper like this across a stamp pad, you find they're a little bit curved and it doesn't work. So I actually got out the black soot Distress Oxide and a blender brush, and clearly did not stay in the camera view for you, but I'm just being super careful to go around the edge and not mess it up. You'll see me many other times in a hurry just take a piece of cardstock and drag it across a stamp pad or something like that. But I mean, I worked on that thing for a long time, right? I colored a lot of trees. So there are different techniques that I might use depending on how important it is to me. And I'm experimenting, and I have a heck of a time trying to figure out where I want that ribbon. That should have been my clue that I didn't want the ribbon. In the end, it was a little harsh, right? I'm creating this scene from childhood, and then I put this big black ribbon across it. I did mail it that way. It was on there, but mostly just because I thought, well, at some point you just have to ship it. That's from a book, but I don't remember which one. I put some adhesive on the mat so it would hold that silly card front down for a minute so I could get the ribbon straight. And the ribbon has Hermadotto on it also. You can put all sorts of different adhesives on ribbon to glue it down. I love to use Hermadotto because it doesn't, if you use a wet adhesive, it comes through sometimes and gets on your fingers or shows. And I'm just experimenting with where exactly do I want the circle, because I know I'm going to use foam mount on the circle. So there's not going to be an undo button once that sucker is stuck on, right? That is why, even though I knew I didn't like the ribbon, I was pretty committed to it, because taking that circle off after I got it all together, at this point, I didn't know I should have ditched the ribbon. I figured it out later. I was trying to accent the writing in the map because it's black, right? So I was trying to pull out that black and accent it. I guess it worked. I don't know. It's really hard to look at your own stuff that's super important to you and not critique it terribly. So here I have the foam mount, and I'm going to put those on the back just like you would with anything else. You can see my cracker box there. When you have a punch, it's super easy to make multiple layers for something. Don't hesitate to do that. Or even if you're cutting like a 3x3 square, keep your cereal boxes and your cracker boxes and all that handy, because if you're using foam mount and your stuff is floppy, that's just kind of messy looking. So here I'm just covering the whole back of that thing, a little bit off camera. Sorry about that again. But you've seen me do that in lots of videos. And you know how to use foam mount. So I've got it all covered, got it right side up. Oh, changed my mind. Ribbon's too high. I did edit some of this out, but there we go. I think that's the spot. And the reason that I have the orange and the green is because we spent a lot of time in Spokane and in Coeur d'Alene, so I needed a little bit of both states. For the color scheme, it really didn't work well, but I worked through it. So that's it. I'm going to push it down. I'm committed to that. Then I'm going to lift it up, trim the ribbon off, and fold the ribbon around the back. It works really well to use Scotch tape for this part. I just didn't reach for any, and I had my Hermafix close, so I put more Hermafix on the ribbon and then folded it back. Scotch tape actually, or washi tape. Washi tape works great because it's really easy to lift it up again. I just don't know why I didn't think of that. I haven't been using a lot of ribbon lately, so that might be why. Okay, at this point, the blue did not go well. The blue was much bolder than I expected. It didn't go with my sky. It didn't enhance the lake like I thought. I like blue, but that didn't speak to me. It didn't work. So that's when I had to kind of rethink what I was going to do. I don't know, maybe you guys will look at it and say I should have kept the blue. You can tell me. So I'm thinking about, okay, what are some options? Well, we can always mat it in black. That's always a choice, right? White is always a choice and black is always a choice. The other thing I realized at this point is there's no white on this card. So then I skipped all this, but I took the background with the white and I inked the top with blue and I inked the bottom with the green. And then I still hated it because then the blues didn't match at all. See that? That's terrible. So then I changed my mind and I matted it in black. And then I experimented with just the black and putting it on there. And I put it together just like that. And then I looked at it and I thought I was done. And I did not like it. And after all that time, I thought, well, I should really like it. So I came back in with a little more of that salty ocean blue because I was trying to tie in the top part with the actual card base where I've inked it. See in that upper left-hand corner how dark that bright blue is? That is too much. It just doesn't go with the card. So at this point, I thought, okay, I'm done. I'm looking at it. I love some of the details. And then I realized, oh no, I've got a plan. So I went back and I cut a big chunk of Idaho and Washington. And I'm going to use that as my entire card front. Okay, so I have my card base under there that I inked. And I'm covering the whole thing. I had to put it together and take it apart a million times because I was having troubles with my cutter, which is why you'll see another card video or another cutter video this week. I'm still learning the big one. And then I put it all together and I liked this a lot better. I thought it emphasized the focal point, the map better. It tied it all together. Love how this turned out in the end. So inside it says, "The forest cries out to me, come home," or something like that. I should have showed you better. I hope you like this card and maybe you'll get some ideas from it and you could use old atlases or maps that you have sitting around. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day and be sure to subscribe.